Baby, can't you hear my call? I can't stand.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to another edition of the Hey Now podcast. I'm Dave Sims with my sons, Jared and Jordan. We are so glad you could join us, and we're thrilled to have as our guest a Jersey guy, a Penn State guy, and one of the best baseball writers in the business, Tom Verducci of Sports Illustrated, Fox Sports, and MLB Network. Verducci, good to have you with us, man. How are you?
Hey, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me, Dave.
Yeah, absolutely. Two-time Emmy Award winner, and we want to cover a lot of things, so lock yourself in. All right. So your love of baseball, I can trace mine to my old man taking me in Philly. See a guy who wore 24. Don't try to catch the ball like this, but just keep your eye on him. I'm talking about Willie Mays. You had the same type of upbringing with your dad watching the Mick and Willie?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I got to do some fact checking here because Emmys are hard to get, and it's actually 5 now.
Atta baby.
Got 5 of them.
Atta baby.
But yeah, I was lucky in that my dad was a high school baseball and football coach. So I say I'm lucky because obviously I just fell in love with the sports, both of them actually. And I saw what went into actually, preparing a team for a game. I mean, he was a coach even when he wasn't at practice or a game.
Yeah.
So I saw the work he did at home. So for some reason, I always loved baseball. My favorite sport was always baseball. My mom and dad tell stories about watching games on TV when I was just young enough to walk, where I'd set up pillows on the living room floor. Those were the bases. And when the ball was hit, I'd run around the bases and slide into home. But I really believe it's because my dad was a high school coach. And I think, Dave, that's actually why I think I take a little bit of a different perspective at the game. I tend to look at the game from the inside out. Most people come to the game as fans. They write from above, 30,000 feet above. I like to know the whys of the game, not just the what.
Give me a couple examples of those whys that you're looking for and things that you enjoy writing about and love exploring.
Well, I remember actually when my dad's team was playing a high school state championship game, and it was a first and third play, and he started the runner on first to try to get a balk out of the pitcher, and he did. The pitcher did not step off, which is a balk, before he tried to make a play on the runner, and the umpires missed it, and they lost the game 1-0. And I just remember him talking about after the game, hey, we planned this, we worked on it. The umpire just missed the call. It happens. But how many 12, 13-year-old kids are learning the balk rule? So for me, yeah, I love just a recent story from the World Series. Anthony Bonda, this left-handed pitcher, he actually pitched in every winning game of the World Series. Not many guys have done that. All 4 Dodger wins. He was part of those. He was a journeyman guy. The Dodgers picked him up from Cleveland in the minor leagues in May. And they got him into camp, so to speak. It was during the season. So they brought him to Dodger Stadium and they had him throw a bullpen session. And they almost laughed when they saw how he threw his slider. He had a 3-finger grip. And then they put him on that Edgertronic camera, the high-speed camera where you can actually see the ball coming out of a guy's hand. And Bonda is a guy he's an overpronator. So he throws a changeup naturally, like throwing a football spiral. But he had a hard time throwing a breaking pitch because everybody told him, you've got to get your fingers around the front of the baseball. And he's like, how do you do that? I just can't do it. His hand didn't work that way. And the Dodgers showed him on the Edgertronic that you actually can throw a slider without getting to the front of the baseball, work with the way your hand works. And it really changed his career. That one little move the Dodgers made, Connor McGinnis is their assistant pitching coach. I call him the king of spin. He knows all about these things. I dig those kinds of things, Dave, whether it's a swing adjustment, whether it's a new pitch somebody came up with. There's always a reason why things are happening. I love the fact that major league players are not finished products. We like to think they are, but they're always learning.
They're always manipulating, changing, experimenting. And then the mental ups and downs, when you're cold, I got to change this. Let me do this. It's pretty remarkable.
Yeah, Tom, I got a question for you. How do you apply that in your craft as far as, evolving and, improving and, always looking to better yourself a little bit every day?
Yeah, that's a great question because I always feel like the more I learn about baseball, the more I know what I don't know. And the game, I swear, baseball, I've been covering it for a long time and since 1982. And I swear baseball has changed more in the last 5 to 7 years than it has in those first couple of decades. It really is. So if you look at baseball, say, this is the game that I grew up with, it's very different, whether it's the technology, whether it's the way the game is taught. I just love to keep up the speed on everything. So for me to stay on top of things, I have found that managers and coaches especially are great resources. I mean, coaches I think are so undervalued. First of all, they're underpaid in the game.
Without a doubt.
They have such great history, a love of the game. They see the game from the inside out. I just find they're a great resource to talk to. And it's not to say players aren't great. I love exploring the personalities of players and how they do what they do. But for me, it's making sure, even if I'm not working on a particular story, talking to coaches and saying, "Hey, what's up? What's new? What's going on with this guy?" It's just amazing where those conversations go.
Tom, we talked a few years ago when I founded a virtual reality training company called Monsterful VR, and Win Reality was my competitor, and they're doing great now. I sold my company to a private equity group in Chicago. But I just remember how in depth the questions that you'd asked, how in depth they were, and I love the fact that you get to the bottom of things in a way that it's coming from a place of genuine curiosity. When that was our conversation or everything I've seen you do on the air. So talk your shit with the 5 Emmys, let them know.
Hey, I'm glad you used that word, by the way, curiosity. Like when I talk to high school students or college students, what it takes to get ahead in this business. It's almost like number one. The first thing I tell them is read. Just read a lot. It makes you such a better citizen of the world besides being a better writer. But also, you have to be curious. What you don't know is really is what should drive you. And curiosity can go a really long way in this business.
Yeah, I totally agree. And for any business, like I'm in a new academic pursuit right now, so trying to stay curious constantly is certainly a motivator, and it helps me learn. But I'm curious about, as a young journalist, how did you go about establishing those relationships with coaches, players, managers, and how were you able to ingratiate yourselves with them so they would actually talk to you?
Yeah, that's a great question because it takes time, man. And it can be frustrating when you're starting out. I think especially in baseball. I know at SI, when some of the other writers who are not baseball writers get assigned an SI story, they're like, do I have to write this? Like, it's hard for an outsider, so to speak, to come in and be accepted right away. And I found that out when I first started covering baseball. In my first year on the beat, I went down to Fort Lauderdale to cover the Yankees. And I mean, it was Bill Madden, it was Murray Chass, it was Moss Klein. I mean, these are the heavyweights of heavyweights when it comes to beat writing, especially on the Yankees. And I was overmatched. I didn't know anybody. I had to just learn the ropes, and you really can't force it. The biggest word I come back to is trust. You have to earn people's trust, and that takes time. And for me, a lot of that is making sure that I check in with people when I don't need something from them.
That's a good point. That's a very good point.
In other words, turn the tape recorder off, close the notebook, and just talk to somebody conversationally. I don't want that guy when I come over, like, what does this guy want now? Where it's never a give and take. It's always take, take, take. As a journalist, all you're doing is asking questions and getting answers. Well, it shouldn't be that way. To establish trust, you really have to just converse with people. And again, it gets back to curiosity. I'm not talking with them just because, I think I want to establish a relationship. I want to know about the person, what floats their boat, how they spent the afternoon, any good restaurants in the town, whatever it is. I think just having conversations and not just having a Q&A goes a long way to establishing the trust. But let me tell you, it does take time. You really can't force that.
Yeah, I found that when I went out to Seattle, getting to know a whole group of guys on the other side of the country, and then getting to know everybody in baseball in my play-by-play duties. And the fact what you just said, I think, plays well in terms of a writer. And then when you transition into doing games on TV, you've got relationships with guys, and you can pull anecdotes and apply to the situation.
Yeah, 100%, Dave. I think when when I do games on TV, it's about, first of all, information. Your number one job is to document the game. That's the first thing. You have to get it right. You need to tell people something about the game that they, even though they're watching the game, something that they don't see, whether it's a story, whether it's the way the relay was set up from the outfield to the shortstop to the catcher. Something I don't see, you need to bring to them. And I think the way you do that is by having just a boatload of information. I mean, I go into a game, and I'm sure it happens with you, Dave, and this is true of writing a really long feature story too. You have so much that's left on the cutting room floor, but that's what you need. That's how you need to prep for a game. You need to be prepared for the game, to go anywhere, for anybody to be the certain star of the game. You just can't wing it that way. So you're right. Having those things in your notebook, or at least in your head sometimes, really helps, because you want to be informative, but you also want to entertain. I mean, the way I look at doing a game is you should feel like you're sitting next to me in the stands, and we're just two guys talking baseball, right?
Everything but a beer. Everything but a beer.
Exactly. Or beverage of choice. Let's put it that way. Because
Yeah.
I don't want you to do math. My goal is if there's something really interesting, and I love the analytics, and it does work in a broadcast. It's like seasoning in a good dish, right? You don't want to overwhelm it, but a little seasoning helps out.
I got to tell you just made me real happy right there because I like analytics, but I'm not enslaved by it.
It's a
And
great way to put it. I mean, it does. I think it enhances the game. I mean, but you can't make people do math. My goal is if there's something really interesting, I hope that you will hear it and be able to turn to somebody and say, "Hey, did you hear that? Johnny Cueto hasn't get up a home run on a changeup in like 1,000 pitches." That
okay,
people can digest. But if
right.
they have to get the pen and pad out to do some math, you're going to lose them.
You know, you said beverage of choice. It's like the stat you just mentioned feels like it's like relatable underneath the bottom of a Snapple bottle cap, and you can tell somebody easily. But if it's too in depth and it's like, makes your eyes bleed, or you have to like do geometry and just a lot of math, it doesn't work as well.
No, that's so true. And especially today, let's face it, there's so much out there. If you want to get into the weeds, you can get deep into the weeds.
I saw one the other day, something about expected on base batting average. And I was like, wait a minute, Grandma in Bothell, Washington just wants to know what the score is and who's a good guy, who's a bad guy, who's hot, who's cold. I mean, come on.
Yeah, and listen, Dave, the games I do, I mean, between Fox, FS1, and MLB Network, I do 30 to 40 national games a year. I don't know if anybody does actually more than that. And that audience to me is, as much as I love analytics and sabermetrics, they're not all sabermetricians listening to the game, right? So you have to be, again, informative and entertaining at the same time without losing people. You don't want to turn people off.
Right, exactly. Hey, take me back to Penn State. What was your first big article that got you going and say, hey, I like this. I want to earn some money doing this eventually.
Yeah, I remember the first thing that I wrote for the Daily Collegian, which is great, actually. One of the reasons I chose Penn State was it's a great school, but also the resources at a really big school with a big sports program. The daily newspaper, circulation of 20,000. It was real world experience besides, yeah, it's a student newspaper. I get it, but you're doing a real job. So my first assignment was covering the Penn State wrestling team.
Ooh,
And
that's
I
big
wrote
time.
yeah, good program. And I wrote a sidebar on some match. One of the players, I think he was a freshman, his first match or something. And I just remember when the story came out, it appeared in the paper. It was the first thing I had published. I was like, that's cool. But I got to tell you, for me, the cool part was in the writing of the story. And this sounds corny, Dave, but it's true that if I didn't have a name, a byline on my story, I'd be perfectly fine with that. I didn't get a kick out of seeing my byline. I got a kick out of seeing my story. So for me, it's all about the process. I love the writing process. That's the first thing that I really fell in love with. And then it was sports. And I thought, hey, it'd be cool to kind of combine the two of them. So for me, I was lucky, Dave. I always knew what I wanted to do. I mean, from the time I was probably 7 or 8 years old, I knew I wanted to write and I wanted to write about sports. So when I got to Penn State, again, I took advantage, covered the football team, obviously, and some other things there. It was a great experience. I love seeing the guys from Philly and from Pittsburgh come into Penn State on a football weekend and see how the pros did it and kind of
Yeah,
hang around them.
yeah.
It was a great experience.
Wow, that's good for you. Good for you.
Tom, who are some of your early writing influences, either in sports or otherwise?
Well, I'll always remember Dick Young, and I know Dave remembers Dick Young from the Daily News.
Man, he hired me. Yeah.
He was a groundbreaker. I mean, way before my time. He's covering the Brooklyn Dodgers. He was the first one who actually went down to the clubhouse and actually talked to players and wrote game stories with quotes in them. And then I remember in the 1986 World Series, I don't know if you guys remember when that parachuter swooped in at Shea Stadium right before the first pitch. I was actually in the Shea Stadium press box next to Dick Young. And he was, a veteran, big name syndicated columnist in New York. He started working the phones and checking with his police contacts, like, what's happened to this guy? Has he been jailed? Has he been charged with anything? Like a cub reporter. I was so impressed by that. He was an ornery guy. There's no question about it. It came across in his writing. But he made you read him. Like he was the epitome of a columnist because he would have a take and a strong take on something. But the fact that he had such a good work ethic really stood out to me. So that really stood out. And as far as writing in general, there's a book I read early on by this writer named Anne Lamott. It's called Bird by Bird. She tells this story about she had an assignment in school. I guess she was in art class or something, and she had to paint all these different birds, so many birds. She's like, how the heck am I going to get through this? And there's just too much work. And somebody told her there's only one way to do it, and that is bird by bird. You can only do what's in front of you, in other words. I always remembered that, but especially the advice she had about the writing process. I love reading about the writing process.
Dick Young was a piece of work, and he was ornery. But you're right; he was a must-read. His Clubhouse Confidential Notes columns have been copied. He and Jimmy Powers going way, way back. I mean, I grew up when I got to the Daily News right out of college. I got all these Korea and World War II veterans, just crusty. I mean, right out of East Side kids, just tough guys. Hey, kid, I'm like, hey, that thing sucks. Let's rewrite that. Hey, I didn't like that. Hey, and that was my break-in at the Daily News. So I remember meeting you. I remember when you were just starting out at Newsday. Was it 83, right?
My first year was 82 at Newsday. That was my first year. So right around the early mid 80s.
Yeah. Wow. Unbelievable. Hey, let's switch over to something I know you have a take on this, the Hall of Fame, the steroid debate. Where do you stand on that? I mean, guys like Bonds, A-Rod, and those guys, will they ever get in?
Ever's a long time, as you know. My guess is that something happens along the way where it does. Just the passage of time. Like I see now that I see some people voting for the Hall of Fame, and this has always been true, that there's such a lag period, right? Guys have to wait 5 years after they're retired. They're on the ballot for 10 years. So you have people making judgments on the steroid era who were in junior high school. They weren't around covering the game and what it was like. They have this idea that everybody was doing it. And everybody was not doing it. In fact, when I sit down with the ballot, I always think of the guys I talk to who were playing the game clean. And before everything broke and before there was testing for steroids, they were like, this isn't fair. It's an unfair game because I'm morally opposed and even physically, the risks of it. I don't want to use steroids, but if I don't use steroids, I'm at a competitive disadvantage. And I always hear those voices in my head that not everybody's doing it. And it was an unfair advantage. So for me, the most basic thing you can do as an athlete is compete fairly. When you use steroids, you are intentionally creating an uneven playing field. And I can't abide by that. And I'd say you can have your records, you have all the money. I'm not taking anything away from you, but I'm not endorsing you for the highest honor you can possibly give somebody in baseball, and that's the Hall of Fame. So for me, my standard is if I can say with public proof that you were tainted by PED use. So I'm not going by rumors or, how many pounds somebody added or the size of somebody's head and how it grew. But if there's public proof out there and I use the journalist standards, if I can write that, then yeah, I'm not voting for you. Now, I do think not everybody obviously feels that way. Actually, the majority of baseball writers think these guys should be in the Hall of Fame. But the problem is you need 3/4 of the vote to get into the Hall of Fame. It's a really high bar.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure any company or group of people would pass that bar at 75%. So at some point, these guys all pass to these competition committees, veteran committees, if you will. It all depends on the people in the room that day and who can create an argument that they should be in. So it's likely I've been in that room before on other ones, not with steroid guys, and I can see how it's almost like a jury room.
I was going to say, what's it like being in that room?
Yeah, it's like a jury room where there are certain people who kind of step to the fore and have their opinions heard. And especially if they have firsthand knowledge of a candidate, I managed this guy, or I was an executive with this guy, or I played with this guy. It's very convincing because people are honest. Nothing comes out of that room. What's said in that room stays in that room. So I think the honesty is why that process works. It's very, very interesting, and it's not a rubber stamp process at all. It's a really, really good conversation.
Without betraying the confidences of those in that room and sharing anything you shouldn't, can you give us a sense of what those conversations are like in terms of the emotion of it, and when someone's really advocating for or against a certain candidate?
Yeah, I think people kind of keep the emotions in check, but when you've got your favorite guy and you think he should be in the Hall of Fame, you hear the passion. That's the word that I would use, passion. And the same works the other way. I've been in the room where people talked about, hey, I didn't think this guy was that great of a player. I put him on the trade market, or I managed him and I couldn't get much value for him. That's interesting too. I mean, that's probably the rarity. It's more cases that, hey, I played with this guy and I know what his numbers say, but he's even better than what those numbers say. So I think passion really comes to the fore.
Well, you're the best in the business, but people are talking. So we have journalistic integrity like you do. Did you juice? Did you juice? Is that why you're so good at what you do?
The comedian in the family.
Yeah.
Adderall, yeah, that helps.
Coffee. If they took coffee away, I'd be in trouble.
Hey, legions of it.
I tell you, I've pulled more all-nighters doing this job than I did at Penn State. That is so true. I mean, especially at SI and you got a deadline, it's a long story and you slave over it. Yeah, there's been a lot of times where coffee got me through the night.
It's interesting you say that, slaving over and overnight. I was at the Daily News, was a tabloid. You were at Newsday, was a tabloid as well, but you get a chance at SI to do long form. So when I'm banging out maybe 500, 550 words in a game story, maybe another 300 on a sidebar, what's the average length of some of the profiles that and you've written some great pieces at SI?
Yeah, wow, they go anywhere from 5,000 to 12,000 words. I think a piece I wrote on Darryl Strawberry and Doc Gooden is actually one of the longest pieces ever in the magazine. And then during the pandemic, I wrote a story that was actually, I think it was even longer. I wrote this story about this guy who covered the 1919 Boston Red Sox with Babe Ruth, of course, and they won the World Series. But that was when the pandemic hit in 1919. And it was about a beat writer for the Boston Globe and his experiences covering this crazy team with Babe Ruth and then dealing with the world changing. And I was during COVID, and obviously there wasn't much to write about. And I didn't think there was anything else to write about but COVID. So I went back to that one and I wrote this story. It's called Love Letters from the Hub. And it's written in letter form in the voice of this beat writer for the Boston Globe, who actually wound up dying from the pandemic back then, as did his wife. And it was, I should turn it into a book because it's one of the longest pieces ever written in SI. And I just had a blast doing it.
15, 20,000 words or what?
It was probably about 18,000 words.
Holy mackerel. Good.
Yeah.
For you.
And actually they cut it down in the magazine. The beauty now of online is you don't run out of pages, right? I don't know if people are going to read the whole thing, but the online version is actually longer than what appeared in the magazine.
Favorite piece that your long form pieces? I mean, you've written the books, but let's just talk about SI for a second. Is that one of your top 2 or 3 pieces that you've written?
Yeah, it had to be because to me it was just a labor of love. It was very, I thought it was very creative. It was a story that I came up with, an idea that I came up with, and I basically drove the whole thing, research and whatnot, not relying on the subject matter for an interviewer to carry it. But other than that, there's a lot of things. I mean, it's hard to pick them out. I loved writing about the Boston Red Sox when they were 2004 Sportsman of the Year. I remember they gave me the assignment. And I had written so much about the Red Sox in 2004, throughout the postseason, the bloody sock, the idiots, everything. I was like, what am I going to write? I mean, what is there left to say at this point? So what I did was I wrote it through a fan's perspective, like Red Sox Nation, and what it meant to all those people who went out to the graves of their grandfathers or fathers and mothers and posted, the page 1 of the Boston Globe out there or flowers. And it was really cool. I tracked down through the ticket office and with the Red Sox a ton of fans, and they all had individual stories to tell why that team is so important to them and to the whole New England region. So that one stands out. And in '99, I wrote a piece. We titled it Our Favorite Profile, which is of a person, not the actual story, Sandy Koufax. Sandy Koufax. And I've talked to some colleges that use that in their literature classes now. I was always fascinated with Sandy. I didn't really remember him pitching, but I obviously know his story. I've got to know him pretty well over the years since then. And he's such a class act. I just love everything about Sandy Koufax and what he stands for.
I got to tell you something. You just mentioned, I guess the holy trinity, one of guys that I've admired, heroes of mine, and he's one of them. Jim Brown, Will Chamberlain, but Sandy Koufax, and especially a lot of my friends in Philly and New York, my Jewish friends, the left hand of God, all but take a knee at the mere mention of his name. And he's one of the. I've met a lot of guys like you have, Tom. I still want to meet Sandy Koufax. I read your piece. I read Jane Levy's her book.
Yep.
They say he is the prince. He's such a prince.
Yeah. He's one of those guys that, you have this idealized version of somebody and they never live up to it. 2 guys have for me, and that's Vin Scully and Sandy Koufax. Just true gentlemen. But I'd be remiss if I didn't mention my most fun story, Dave, and that's when I went to spring training with the Toronto Blue Jays in
Right.
2005. Walked into camp, spent a week with the Blue Jays, full uniform, played an inter squad game, had a blast. I mean, it was the ultimate fantasy camp.
What was now, folks? Tom's a good athlete, and some of our media games that we had against Yankee coaching staffs over the years, we had to have Tom Verducci. I caught, nobody else wanted to catch, and I was a catcher anyway. So
A really good catcher too.
Well, thank you. But I was so glad that when I saw that you could play, I was like, yes, we're gonna be okay.
What position were you, Tom?
Outfield. So
Yeah.
I thought, you know what, my job is to cover the baseballs, get people as close as I can to the game.
Yeah.
What better way to get them closer, a la George Plimpton, right?
Mm-hmm.
Of actually putting on a uniform and telling people what it's like at major league speed, ground level. So I went to the Toronto Blue Jays, and I thought basically nobody was going to let me do it, right? And I went to the
Oh,
Blue
right.
Jays because they weren't very good at the time, and I didn't want to create a scene. I wanted this to be as low key as possible. You know, you walk into a major market, you know, New York, Boston, or something, it's going to be a big deal. Didn't want that. And the Blue Jays were like, "Yeah, just tell us when you want to come in." So it was that easy, if you can believe it or not. I remember the first time I went into hitting the batting cage against Roy Halladay.
Ooh.
John Gibbons, the manager, says to me, "Wait a second." I'm like, "What's up?" He said, "You did sign a waiver, didn't you?" And I'm like, "No, actually, I didn't." Gibby says, "You're not going to be writing about this. You're going to be owning the team." It is amazing, though. I did not sign a waiver to go in
Wow.
there and play Major League Baseball for a week. It was crazy.
And then you stepped in with Doc as the first guy that was throwing pitches your way.
I mean, I remember asking, because I couldn't believe how hard he was throwing, right? And he's like, "You know what? I've been on the mound since January." I mean, it's amazed me that these guys, and you see it, Dave, in spring
Yeah.
training. It's not like the old days where Lou Piniella would come in with his rubber jacket and try to sweat off the pounds from the offseason, right? These guys hit the ground running, man. He's blown it first day of spring training.
What did like 90, 95 look like?
Well, I'll tell you the story of the one at bat that I had, which I think defines how fast it is. I had one at bat in the inter squad game. It was against Chad Godin. I don't know if you remember
Remember
him.
him? Yeah.
Yeah, he threw mid-90s, threw hard. So the first at bat, I'm like, you know, I'm going to have one at bat in my major league career, right? So I'm swinging first pitch. There's no
Yes.
taking here,
Yes.
right? First pitch, he throws a fastball, two-seamer. I'm like, I'm swinging. Before I knew it, before the message got from my head to my hands, the ball's in the catcher's mitt. It happened so quickly. I never got a swing off. Now I'm in trouble. Now it's 0-1. And he comes back with a two-seamer running all the way in on my hands. And I swung this time, started probably way too early, missed it. Now it's 0-2. And he throws another one just a little bit higher. And I actually popped it up. Broken bat, pop up to first base.
Delicious.
It is the greatest pop up in the history of Major League Baseball. But I'm telling you, it was so fast. You know, there was one time also where I umpired a spring training game. I umpired 3 innings at first, 3 at second, 3 at third. It was a Red Sox-Orioles game. And I could not believe the speed of the game at ground level. I mean, with a runner on first base, the first base umpire moves behind the pitcher, right? Between the mound and second base. So I'm behind Kurt Schilling, and I think Manny Ramirez or somebody's at bat. Well, it wasn't Manny, it was an Oriole at bat. And I remember thinking, man, I'm not wearing a cup.
Oh!
It's like I felt that close to the hitter at that point, and the ball is moving so fast. So the games on TV look great, but I'm telling you, they don't do justice to the speed of the game.
Yeah. See, you know, I've been lucky covering baseball, you know, as a little bit as a writer, and certainly not the last 18 years, 20 years counting ESPN. I'm amazed. I remember Willie Randolph asked me, "Hey, step in the cage." And he says, "It's only 70. It might as well have been 370." And I could swing it a little bit. I was like, holy Toledo. And your respect for these guys just, you know, exponentially rises, right? I mean, even a 200 hitter, a 190 hitter, you're going, hey, he's one of the, you know, he's a major leaguer.
No question. One of my favorite times a year, it might be for you too, Dave, is spring training, right? I love to watch the practices, how guys work.
Yeah.
And especially you go down to the 6-pack of mounds and bullpen. Sometimes there's more than 6 these days, actually. And you see guys throwing their bullpen sessions, and you can get really close to them. And I watched them throw, and I'm like, I don't know how anybody ever gets a hit. And it's not just
Seriously.
speed, it's how the ball's moving at high speeds. It's
Yeah.
crazy, one
Yeah.
after another.
I watched Robbie Ray warm up a couple of years ago. I said, "You got to be kidding me!" I got within. I didn't get in a box, but I got like about 10 feet away, and just to hear the, and then he's grunting as he's throwing, and he's breaking off. It's just. What was your adrenaline like? Like like you're getting dressed, and no batting number 2, Tom Verducci. You get announced and everything.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing I wanted to do was not pull a hammy because if I pull a hammy the first day of spring training, there's no story. So I stayed out at the trainer's room. That was a success. But Dave, I was around such a great group of guys. They made it so relaxed and easy for me. I mean, Reed
Yeah.
Johnson, Vernon Wells, great dude. Frank Catalanato. I was hanging out with the outfielders. Yeah, I was hanging out with the outfielders most of the week. It's interesting when you're with a major league team, and I kind of knew this, but I really felt it more, being part of the team actually. Like the position players and the pitchers, they're like on two different planets, man. They're always doing their own thing. They think about the game differently. They're all a team, but it's like, I guess it's like offense and defense in football
For
where
sure.
they're just on a different planet. And like, I didn't hang out with the pitchers at all. I'd say hello to them, obviously, but you're on a different schedule. It was just weird seeing it up close. I always knew it was the case, but that divide there is real.
John Buck, former catcher, is a friend, and he's lovingly referred to pitchers as weirdos. I always found that to be hilarious. So it aligns with what you just said there.
Oh,
Yeah,
man.
I don't know how catchers do it because I think they have the hardest job in baseball
No.
because they have to bridge both sides, right? And especially what we ask of catchers in the game today with so much information and running a game and just the physical nature of the game, getting beat up all the time. And oh, by the way, go out there and hit too.
And you got to be a psychologist as well.
And a psychologist, that's why they make such great managers, right? But man, you got a good catcher, you got something gold.
Yeah. Hey, let's talk about the World Series that you mentioned earlier, something that fans don't know. Give me one or two things from the series that sort of like fits that category. Anything in particular? I mean, certainly it's been autopsy to death, but I mean, is there a couple of things that maybe jumped out at you?
Yeah, I thought Dave Roberts had a great series. I always think he's been underrated as a manager because Dodgers have so many resources. In the past, I think the Dodgers have been a little too scripted with getting pitchers out of the game third time around. But I think Dave does a fantastic job. I love Andrew Friedman's explanation or description of Dave. He is relentlessly optimistic. I love that. So for me, I loved watching Game 5. And we're counting pitchers for the Dodgers as the game's going on. Flaherty checked out in the second inning, and Dave just didn't have enough pitchers to cover the game. And we don't know where this game is going. So he's got Blake Trinan on the mound, and Blake is, God bless him. I mean, he gave Dave everything that he had in that series. An older guy, he's had some arm issues, hadn't pitched that long all year long. And Dave goes out to the mound with Stanton coming up to the plate with 2 runners on base. And Dave did the right thing coming out of the dugout. As a manager, you better let your pitcher know you're not taking him out. And he gave him a hand signal right away. Like, be cool. We're not taking you out here because you don't want your pitcher to let his guard down. Like, whew, I'm out of the game.
Yeah.
So he did that well. Then he goes out to the mound and he literally put his hands on his chest because he just wanted to feel how he was physically, how you're breathing, everything under control. And he looked him in the eye and he wanted to hear in his voice, what do you think? And Blake said, I've got him, meaning Stanton. I got it. I want him. And he convinced Dave Roberts to leave him in the game. And he did have Hudson up in the bullpen. So he gets Stanton on one pitch, right? A sinker. I think he popped out to Mookie in right field. Now Dave is thinking, all right, he got his one guy. I'll bring in Hudson on Rizzo. So he looks across the field and he sees Freddie Freeman at first base. And Freddie is like pushing his hands down, like, relax, stay there. He's good. Leave him alone. So Dave Roberts was going to take him out, but based on Freddie Freeman and the trust he has in his veteran players, he left Trinan in for one more batter, and he strikes out Rizzo with just a ridiculous breaking ball. I love that kind of story because, in those blink moments, and we always think these managers are just doing things the front office wants them to do and everything's scripted. There's some truth to that, but obviously it's not that much.
Hey.
I love those moments when the manager in real time, heat of the moment, has to make these decisions and the trust that he has in his players. And that doesn't happen by accident because Dave does that all year long, year after year, where the players do trust him and he trusts them.
That's called managing at its best and knowing your personnel. I think that's a beautiful thing, and I'm very fortunate that that Freddie was pretty demonstrative that Dave was able to see him. Speaking of the MVP, where did you think of that performance by Mr. Freeman? With his kid looked like his son was not going to make it during the summer, and he's playing on a bad ankle. And this guy has a World Series MVP campaign like you can't believe.
Yeah, first of all, if anybody has met Freddie once, he is exactly what you see in first impression. He's just a great guy. He
Yeah,
really is. And he's a Hall of Fame hitter. He's one
yeah,
of the best hitters of this generation.
no doubt.
If you look at where Freddie Freeman's hits are, and he's got, I don't know how many he has, 2,000 or something more than that. They're almost an equal distribution of left
Right,
field, center
right.
field, and right field. It's crazy. Look how teams defend him. They have to play him straight up. He's just a pure great hitter. The interesting thing to me is I've never seen anybody swing the bat like Freddie Freeman. Like, I love doing comps, historical comps. This
Yeah.
guy's
Oh,
swing looks like this.
yeah.
There's nobody who swings the bat like Freddie Freeman. He keeps his hands inside the ball so well. He's got that quick path to the ball, that really high finish. He's just carving line drives over the shortstop head, but you leave something inside. We saw him many times in the World Series.
Well, how about the
He's
ball
gonna
at
hit-
the pitch that was running away from me? He hooks it into the state at Yankee Stadium. That pitch was
Yes,
going
yeah.
away.
I mean, what I love too, Dave, is that, and I talked to Freddie about his swing. He said this is the same swing his dad taught him growing up. His dad was his hitting coach. He also told me he played a lot of golf. He said that's probably why I finished so high. It's like a driver's
Mm,
swing. But he said, when you're looking at me, you're looking at my dad and the way he carved my swing. So the comp I use now is not a baseball comp. It's Scotty Scheffler. I mean, think about Scotty Scheffler. There's a lot of hitting coaches or swing coaches in golf who would look at his swing and say, you can't move your feet like that. You've got to have a pure textbook swing than what you've got here. But Scotty had the same coach since he was like 6 years old playing golf and never varied with the swing, never varied to his swing coach. So I've said it a lot, Dave, that I believe on the amateur level, there's more swings that are ruined and pitchers that are ruined more by overcoaching than undercoaching. Work with what you got.
oh
That's what
man,
Tony Gwynn told me a long time ago. The most important thing about hitting, know your swing. Sometimes you can copy or borrow at least from other people. There's certain things you can take, but the body wants to work a certain way. And for Freddie Freeman, it's a testament to his dad and the job that he
there
did.
you go. Know what in your body. And Jordy's a big basketball guy, and
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing. Jump shooting. Like in terms of there's a bunch of guys who have strange mechanics, but they make it because they have a few consistent things. If they're able to repeat that motion, and once you tinker with guys' shots too much, like I'm a Knicks fan, and Mikal Bridges, I'm thinking of his shot right now. But yeah, I think it's a very good parallel with jump shooting in basketball.
wow.
Yeah, and the smart coaches leave them alone until you fail, right? Until you fail. Well, maybe we have to look at something at that point. But if it's working, work with what you got.
No doubt about it. Hey, let's talk about some of the books that you've written. And I know the Yankee Years you co-authored with Joe Torre, another one of my all-time favorite guys. What was it like working with Joe? Because he's the category of good people. He's right there.
Absolutely. I mean, he's a Hall of Famer in every respect. I mean, probably as a player as well, but certainly as a manager, he
Yeah.
was inducted. But he's a Hall of Fame person as well. Just ask anybody. His greatest skill as a manager, besides like putting out fires from Steinbrenner before they actually started, was just relationships with people. It's amazing the way everybody connected to Joe Torre, and still do. You talk to managers today, by the way, a lot of them have Joe Torre in their phone and they're talking to them and getting advice. He's always congratulating them when they get to the postseason. So for me, it was so easy working with Joe. I mean, there's no hidden agendas. There's no massaging the truth. He's just completely honest. And I think that's why players responded so well. I mean, David, with players, man, that if they find you're not being honest with them at all, just a little bit, you've lost them. And Joe Torre never lost anybody for not being honest.
And I like the fact that Jeter still always calls him Mr. T.
Mr. T. To this day, still does.
God, that's amazing. Hey, another thing I wanted to ask you about. You sat down with our friend Bob Costas, announced his retirement from doing play-by-play. So you did a sit down with him at MLB Network, and you guys are pals. Was that a tough interview for you? I mean, how'd you get? What was your approach going in?
Yeah, I'll tell you, it was tough, Dave. I intentionally did not talk to Bob before it. I didn't want to sort of influence the authenticity or just the natural feel to it. I didn't know where he was going to go, and I just wanted to respond to that. Um, but yeah, I mean, having a relationship with Bob, I mean, the first game I did in a booth as the analyst was with Bob Costas. I mean, I felt like this catcher called up from A ball in the Florida State League. Yeah, Sandy Koufax is pitching today. Go get him, kid. Sitting next to Bob Costas. That was an incredible break-in. So I've known him for a long time, obviously worked with him a lot, and just have utmost respect for him. He's such a professional. What people really don't know about Bob, he's also such a perfectionist. I mean, he wants to get everything right. He wants to be the best that he can be 100% of the time. I've always respected that about Bob. And I think doing this interview, that's what really I learned, is that that's why he's stepping away, because he can't do it at the level, or at least he thinks he can't do it at the same level that he has accustomed to. He doesn't want to compromise. He's got very high standards. So it was a tough interview because I knew it was going to be kind of like, the coda to his career, if you will, in his own words, to wrap it up. And, no matter what people think about Bob Costas recently or the last postseason series for TBS, the dude is an all-time great. He is a legend. So it's almost like, and he uses this analogy of Mickey Mantle. It's almost like you're sitting down with Mickey Mantle and saying, why are you retiring now? I mean, he's that big in this industry. So, um, it was a tough interview to do, but I thought he handled it great. I mean, it's Bob Costas. I mean, the way he is able to find the right words, the right cadence, like 100% of the time, whether it's the march on for like 99 different countries on the Olympics, or he's sitting down with Mark McGuire, who is admitting using steroids, whether it's doing an HBO show, whether doing play by play. He is amazing how well he thinks and speaks on his feet. I mean, he was born to be a broadcaster. He is natural.
To your point, I remember not long earlier in the season they re-racked the sit down he did with Mr. Mays and Mr. Aaron, and I could watch that a million times. I mean, that's my wheelhouse. That's my era growing up, and you could tell Bob, he was in his element, man. I mean, Willie Mays and Hank Aaron, are you kidding me? Come on, and then just
Yeah.
and over the years interviewing him when I was doing talk radio, having talking about Mantle and their relationship, pretty cool stuff.
Yeah, I mean, Bob he's a true baseball fan. I know he's done other sports, but I think it's his first love. This is a guy who, he carried the card of Mickey Mantle in his wallet for so many years. The first time he ate at Stam Usual's restaurant in St. Louis. This is years ago. I'm talking about in the 80s. He ordered a hamburger, like a $4 or $5 hamburger, and he left a tip of $3.31, which was Stam Usual's career
Right,
batting
of
average.
course.
Right? I mean, you talk about a true aficionado of the game. That's Bob Costas.
You're gonna steal that one, Dad?
No, that's already on the books, man. I can't do that. But that is really well thought out, and that's really something.
Oh, Tom, just real quick, Dad. Tom, our dad's an aficionado, as you know, and you guys know each other and go back. But just you can guess all of his passwords by he gave you the codex. You used that word before to
Where'd that come from?
I was just saying, you got a lot in common with Costas on that front.
Oh, without a doubt. I mean, he's only he's like 54 weeks older than I am. So I mean, we watch a lot of the same things. Yeah, I mean, two before. Hey, Tom, personal favorites. Give me some personal favorites. Ballparks. Play. Let's start with ballparks.
Yeah, I mean, I have to separate Wrigley and Fenway, right? I
Right.
just love being in those ballparks. I love the history of it. They look great on TV because they're small and they're intimate, right? The game, it looks best when it's not a spectacle. Like the NFL is a spectacle, the NBA is a spectacle. Baseball looks great when it looks intimate. That's like the Field of Dreams game we did a few years ago on Fox, right? The smaller, almost the better. And I think the way it compresses space, Wrigley and Fenway,
Yeah.
even when you're there or not there, it's just got this intimate feel to it. So take those two out. The newer ones, and it's actually getting older now, is Camden Yards is still the best for me. I mean, Janet Marie Smith probably should be a Hall of Famer with what she's done for this game in designing ballparks and the way people consume baseball and the retro ballparks. I thought Camden pretty much did it first and they did it best. I don't think anybody has topped them. A lot of great ones. Pittsburgh is beautiful. You
Oh,
can't beat the setting in San Francisco.
right.
I love Seattle. There's something about that ballpark, especially in the middle of summer, the bright blue sky where it just looks
It
spectacular.
doesn't get dark till almost 10 o'clock at
Yeah,
night.
that too. Yeah,
Right?
there's something about the light there. You're right. There
Yeah.
is. Dodger Stadium underrated, I think, as just a classic ballpark. I'm a fan of mid-century architecture, and the pavilion, the scoreboard, things really haven't changed. Even though Janet Marie Smith worked there too, and they've done incredible jobs to upgrade and modernize the ballpark, but it still has that mid-century feel. I'm a big
Yeah.
fan of the feel of that ballpark.
Yeah. Mariners played there this summer. And having grown up watching the 63, 65, 66 series on TV, and it looks pretty much, brick for brick, the same ballpark. I mean, it's really cool. And knowing that, Mr. Scully had been there and Drysdale, that whole crew.
Yeah. Now you go behind the scenes with some of the amenities for the fans and the restaurants and stuff. It'll blow you away. It's not 1963.
Got any Ricky Henderson stories?
Oh my goodness, one of my favorites. Yeah. I wrote a story for SI, and he was playing in Newark at the time.
Oh,
I mean, Ricky
back
was, I
end.
think, 42 years old playing independent ball. So I'm like, I got to go there. I mean, I was there Ricky's first day with the Yankees in '85. I never saw a season like that. I mean, it seemed like every day Ricky would walk, he'd steal second. Willie Randolph would hit a ground ball to second, he'd go to third, and Mattingly would hit a sacrifice fly. I mean, he had more runs scored than games played that year. It was just incredible the way that he just took over baseball games. So, anyway, this years later, I go to Newark, and Ricky is playing for the Newark Bears, and he's actually staying in the city. He's in Manhattan. So I asked him what his rent was, only because I found out Ricky was paying more in rent than he was being paid by the Newark Bears. So he was literally paying to play independent baseball at the age of 42. I mean, how great is that? And then when we were done with the interview, and I don't know if this has ever happened to me before, I'm not sure what it means, but after the interview was over and we stood up, Ricky gave me a really big hug. And that meant a lot to me. It really did. I don't know whether it's because I took the time to see him, at Independent Ballpark in Newark, whether because we went back to the mid 80s, whatever it was. I just thought that was so sweet of the guy who that was his way of thanking me. He gave me this big hug. So, yeah, I mean, there's the million Ricky Henderson stories. Some of them actually true, by the way.
Like Yogi and some shit, right?
Yeah. One of my favorites is, back in the day, I don't think they do it anymore. They used to give players meal money. First day of the road trip, it's a 10-day road trip. I don't know, meal money back then maybe was 40, $50. You'd get all this money in an envelope, cash. And Ricky would never spend that money. He would take the envelopes home, put it in a shoebox. And these things added up over the years. It's a lot of road trips, right? And then when he had kids, he would have his daughters pick an envelope like it was their birthday or some special occasion. And that's what he used the money for. One story that is true with Ricky, by the way, that first time, I think he was the first $3 million a year player. I think it was a 3-year, $9 million deal. And the A's gave him a $1 million signing bonus. It was really big back then. And days passed, and the A's noticed that he still had not cashed his check. And they were wondering, maybe he didn't get it. So they called up Ricky and they said, we sent you this bonus check of $1 million. Just making sure. Did you get it? He said, oh, yeah, I've got it. It's on a frame. It's in a frame on my wall here at home. He literally framed $1 million check.
I heard that. Oh, my God. As they say, Ricky being Ricky. He's beautiful. He's a good dude.
Great dude.
I caught him before a game. We were in Oakland. This it's right before the pandemic. And I said, you look fabulous. Where are you in relation to your weight? He said, only about 3 pounds more than his playing weight. I said, you could go get a bag right now. I said, yeah, I don't know about that. But he's fun. And it was great seeing him when they were closing down a ballpark in Oakland.
Yeah.
He and Stu and the fellas out there.
One of the greatest players who ever lived, at least that I covered. I mean, really, if it's possible that Ricky Henderson is underrated, all-time stolen base, run scored leader, and Mr. Do Everything, greatest leadoff hitter of all time, he might be underrated. He was that good.
Yeah.
And think about this, Dave, when you think about that body and the pounding that it took. Ricky almost always slid head first, and he ran a lot played more than 2 decades.
Yeah, you probably could count on your hands how many times he slid feet first. it was always a
Amazing.
dive. And what was it? He's sort of like well, Bo Jackson, Mike Blowers, who I worked with in Seattle, said you could hear Bo coming. But Ricky, he said he slid in late in the third and he'd hit you, and it was like, he'd been a running back in high school. Forget about
Yep.
it. I mean, it's like you get crushed.
Yeah. He's a
That's
truck. And you know what? I don't think he got enough credit for how smart he was as a baseball player. If you
agreed.
talk hitting with Ricky, especially base running, I mean, he wasn't just running on a whim. He was
No,
studying pitchers. He knew how to get a jump on pitchers. He understood the game at a really micro level that I don't think he ever got enough credit for.
and he, like a lot of the great base dealers, boy, they find tells and little tips, little twitch here, and I always love talking to older guys, a generation older than us, and how, and there's guys now that do it, but be able to read and just, oh, here it comes. Mel, was it who was it? Didier? Was it Mel Didier who
Yep. Great
the,
scout.
the scout and told Gibby about Eckersley's going to throw you that breaking ball. Those kind of guys are invaluable, and I think we miss those guys, those scouts. And those, you talk about another group that doesn't get enough credit, the scouts.
100%. And that reminds me, you think about tells, Shohei Ohtani and stealing all the bases that he did this year. First of all, I don't think he's going to do it again because he will return to pitching. And it's just a physical, as I said, it's a physical toll that it takes on you running that much. But also, he had time without the pitching regimen to really devote to studying those kinds of things. And Clayton McCullough and Dino Ebel, the base coaches for the Dodgers, they do a great job. So he was expert at that. Now he got thrown out twice and hurt his shoulder getting thrown out. That's the irony of it. But he went 3 months without getting thrown out. And as Dino told me, you mentioned Bo Jackson. I just thought about this when you said that. Dino said that you can hear Otani running as he's coming around third. There's a certain sound to those big guys who are moving quickly. It's almost like a freight train coming. Otani actually, there's sound associated with his running.
And the other thing too, his now long gone interpreter. First couple of years, Mariners are playing the Angels, and I watched him go first to third or first to home. So the next day, I said, "Did he run 400 meters in high school?" I said, "No." I said, "Oh my God, can you imagine?" Having covered the Olympics and seen all those great athletes running a 400, he would have been he would have been a world class 400-meter runner. There's no doubt in my mind.
Yeah,
But
he's the greatest athlete in the game today. I
yeah,
used to say that about Mike Trout, but Mike's not on the field enough. But someone like Otani, if you stop and think about it, we should never get used to the fact that each year, other than this year, he's got a chance to be the Cy Young winner and the home run king. I mean, that's just crazy in Major League Baseball and how specialized the game is these days. And you're right. He, as an athlete, I mean, he is freakish. He's big, he's strong, he's fast, he's hyper flexible. There's nobody like him.
and he played through the torn labrum at the back at the last few games of the series,
Yeah, he
in the left
did.
shoulder.
Yeah, and he had to get that operated on. Yeah, I mean, that was amazing that he's out there with basically playing with one shoulder. Now you could tell his swing was compromised, and I think the
Mm-hmm.
Yankees picked up on that. You could go after him a little bit more than you otherwise would, but the fact is he wanted to keep playing. And as Dave Roberts said, even if he's out there in the box, he's going to get a pitcher's attention, even if he's compromised with that
Yeah,
shoulder.
yeah.
So give him credit, man. This guy, everybody was saying, 6 years in LA, he never with the Angels. He never played on a winning team, never came close to the postseason. What would it be like if Shohei got in the postseason? Well, you saw him down the stretch. I mean, he
Oh,
went off in September, and he took it right into the postseason until he got hurt.
hey, play commissioner for a couple of minutes. What would you like to see if you could change a couple of things in baseball, or add to or subtract? What would you do?
Yeah, I'm a fan of the replay system in terms of the challenge system on balls and strikes. I'm not a fan of robo umps, and I think probably in 3 years we'll probably see the system that we're seeing in the minor leagues.
Mm,
Only because I think the technology is there and it seems to be working well. And it's like the calls and the bases, right? I like the idea that you don't want games decided on obvious bad calls. And I think the same is true with pitches. I would not want a full on robo umpire, but a challenge system where the batter or the pitcher or the catcher has a chance to challenge a call, maybe 2 or 3 times a game. So you have to be judicious about it. And obviously, it's only going to be in high leverage spots. But I think it's there. And you see it in the Hawkeye system in tennis, where it also becomes interactive, where fans get into it when they see it on the scoreboard.
right, tennis. Yeah, you're right. Yeah,
So I would not have a problem with that, as long as I think the technology they have locked down, which I think they're pretty darn close to. And like a lot of people, I'd love to see starting pitchers go deeper in the game, but I'm not a fan of some. I'm not a fan of some of the rules they're putting out there, and they're actually not going to happen anyway. But they've floated ideas about making a pitcher throw 6 innings. You can't do that.
No.
I'd love to see the game change in that regard, Dave, but I don't see how it's possible. We've gotten too good at teaching velocity. It used to be when you and I were growing up, if you had a good arm, you threw hard, God blessed you with that, right? And that was it.
Right.
Now we know we can take people with good arms, not just anybody on the street, but people with good arms, we can train them to throw harder. We can train them to shape their pitches to make them harder to hit. So the universe of hard throwers and really good pitchers is expanding so that even though guys are breaking down, there's plenty of guys behind them. I don't know what the answer is to that to try to reestablish the value of starting pitchers.
Yeah.
There's just too many good pitchers.
Yeah, it just bothers me when it's a parade out there. All that, like
Yeah.
there's some stretches of the season. My God, 5 and 6 pitchers. I mean, come on. I mean,
What bothers you about that?
I think that the starting pitcher is one of the really big gigs, big jobs in sports. And I like to see guys work their craft and not just be pulled. And I just grew up with it, and I'm not adverse to change, but I just think that's such a part of the game, part of the history of the game. Starting pitchers, I know it's all about getting 27 outs, but I just think that what Tom was talking about, how they're built to throw, with Olivilo, guy breaks down, all right, we get another one. I mean, it's just not fair to the athletes.
Yeah, I think the reason about the starting pitcher, it's actually good for the attraction of the game. Pitchers become stars. Ed Lynch, the old Mets pitcher, told me a long time ago, pitching is the only position in sports where we literally build a pedestal for them. They pitch off a mound 15 inches high. And I know the wins they were overvalued, right? They're not the be all and the end all by any means, but the average fan knows what it means to be a 20-game winner. There's magic associated with that. Wins for starting pitcher matter. People will make decisions on whether to watch a game or even to go to a game based on the starting pitching matchup. It's the only sport where they tell you, it's Yankees and Dodgers. It's Garrett Cole against Walker Buehler. Whatever it is, the pitching matchup can help define the interest in a game. So if everybody's just going to be an 11-game winner who pitches 5 innings or 4 innings, we're losing stars. And I think it's attractive for the game.
Yeah, I saw Bob Gibson every time my father said, "Hey, is Gibby pitching tonight?" "No, he's pitching tomorrow. We're going." All right. Another thing, Soto, free agency in general. Where do you look for Soto, Santander, Bregman? Where do you anticipate some of these guys going?
Yeah, I think Soto is New York or New York. It's Yankees or Mets. The number is going to be above Shohei Ohtani's present day value, which is 46.6. And Scott Boras is the agent. The minute the Ohtani contract was signed, he had his hurdle to clear. And it's going to be 47 times 13, or probably maybe even more.
Because he's only 26, right?
I think it's a good buy for the Mets. I really do. I mean,
Yeah.
you saw how well they played this year. Probably, did a little bit more than people expected this year. And, Soto, to me, he's one of the few, like, most guaranteed guys in the game. Look at his games played. He plays every day. He's Ted Williams in terms of, not Ted Williams literally, but in terms of knowing the strike zone.
Yeah. Oh, it's
So
exquisite.
his floor, if you go by OPS plus, right, is 142. So in his worst year, he's 42% better than anybody else. So his floor is so darn high.
Yeah.
He's such a good buy. Soto's going to be a DH, 5 years down the road,
Right.
6 years down the road? There's only so many spots there between him, Stanton, and Judge. So, but where they go from there, I don't know. I mean, Santander, I love. He's a good fit for anybody. Toronto, maybe Seattle. Bregman, I think, could be a good fit with the Mets, with the Yankees. He's going to have a good market. I see him going back to Houston now. I think that ballpark is made for him.
With that short left field, are you kidding? Oh, come on.
I mean, the way he just pulls balls into the Crawford box is he would miss that place going anywhere else.
Yeah. The Rays, where do they end up? I know they're building. I'm astounded that they want to build in St. Pete, but right now their biggest problem is putting a roof on the Trop. But what do you see happening with them?
Yeah, this is interesting because you may be looking at baseball next year 2 ballparks being used for Major League Baseball as minor league ballparks, the A's in Sacramento. And, I don't know that Tampa Bay is going to get the repairs done, the Trop in time for opening day.
Yeah.
So they could wind up at either the Phillies facility in Clearwater, George Steinbrenner Field in Tampa, somewhere in that area at a minor league park. Not a good look for baseball in either case, but you have to do what you have to do.
Wow.
Like you, I'm surprised that they're essentially, running it back in terms of the Trop, just a new venue in the same area. Not sure I quite get that, but at least that there's plans to have some vibrancy around the ballpark, and maybe it works there. I don't know, but I am surprised. But
Yeah.
listen, the Rays got in on Freddie Freeman. They made a call on Juan Soto. They're not going to wind up with these players. We know
No
that.
chance.
But if they do have certainty of, future income from a ballpark, maybe they can start investing in players and keeping people there, because the churn rate in both, Oakland and Tampa Bay is so hard. It must be hard to be fans of those teams, knowing you can't fall in love with players.
Don't even think about it.
Dad, before we get out, I just want to slip this in there. It's just a quick question. Tom, there's a guitar behind you over your right shoulder. Is there a story you could tell us about that? And can you play us a chord or two?
I'm not going to play a chord or two, but the
Okay.
story is, this is another thing from the pandemic. Like a lot of people who developed hobbies, like how am I going to fill the time? I was interested in guitar, but I don't have any musical ability. So I got a guitar and I just like self-taught, just started playing chords, and I use it just actually, believe it or not, just not even to play songs, but just to riff. If you just, want to calm down at the end of a day or something, or get in a certain mood, I'll just pick it up and riff. And that's really what it is. I'm by no means a musician, but it's just sort of like a labor of love, and not a very good labor of love, but it hits the sweet spot for me.
Favorite guitar? You got a favorite guitarist? I'm sure you like your rock music. You got a favorite guitarist?
Who I like is probably a little esoteric here. Bruce Coburn, Canadian from a while back. I like acoustic guitars too. Indigo Girls, I love watching them strum
Okay.
their stuff. But basically anything.
Yeah.
I mean, it's hard to be like the classics, the Eric Claptons of the world.
Oh,
George Harrison is the best, but yeah, some of those stand out to me.
cool.
Leadership. You mentioned something awesome about trust, building trust earlier. And, that extends not just to a career as an amazing journalist, but what would you say as far as leadership in business or in any other field you've learned and you think others should know to be great leaders?
Yeah, it reminds me of Joe Torre. I just said is a great leader. It really starts with honesty. Sometimes you have to tell people the truth, and maybe they don't want to hear it. But I know, I did a book with Joe Madden. He's got this great line, like, if you tell people a lie once, you'll lose them forever. And it's true. So I think leadership is sometimes telling people what they don't want to hear, but it's the truth. But a lot of times you have to have that relationship to make sure you're telling people something that maybe they don't want to hear, but you have enough built up in equity and enough in the vault of respect to tell them that. So yeah, I'm big on leadership. Again, my brother is a college football coach. He's coached in the NFL. I have another brother who was a great high school football coach. My dad was a high school football coach and baseball
Wow.
coach. I come from a family of coaches and teachers, and it really is all about leadership. And I tell people all the time that all of us sit down and we think about the 5 people or even the 3 people who most influence us growing up. And if you take out mom and dad or an uncle or an aunt or grandma and grandpa, you're generally going to have teachers and coaches on your list. It just is. And they're so important. And we talked about coaches being underpaid. It's the same people who work in that business as well. But yeah, to me, our great leaders are teachers and coaches. And that's always been true.
Tomas, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Yeah,
Man.
it's been a pleasure, guys. Thank you for having me.
A lot of fun. Hi, everybody. Dave Sibbs from the Hey Now podcast. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow us here on the Hey Now podcast.
Hey!